Imagine you're lying in bed at 2 a.m. The room is dark, quiet, no phone, no conversation, just you and your thoughts. And suddenly, they come alive. What if you lose your job? What if that pain in your chest is something serious? What if the people you love disappear? What if you disappear? Your heart beats a little faster, your mind spins a little louder, and the silence outside only makes the noise inside more unbearable. That voice, it doesn't whisper. It interrogates. It replays old failures, predicts disasters that haven't happened, creates futures that haven't come, and yet somehow you believe it. You believe every scenario it creates, as if worrying were a form of preparation, as if fear were a form of control. But have you ever asked, who's actually speaking in that voice? Is it your own wisdom or your old wounds wearing a mask? Most people think the voice inside their head is their intuition. But what if it's just accumulated fear? What if the voice that sounds like you actually a story built from every fear you've absorbed but never questioned? Here's the thing about that voice, it never runs out of things to say. Unless you stop and ask, is this voice helping me or haunting me? Stop, just for a second, listen. Not to the outside world, but to the voice inside your head, the one narrating this very moment. The one commenting on what you're doing, feeling, fearing. It's always there, like a radio that never shuts off. But here's the real question, who is listening to that voice? That's the question Marcus Aurelius, the Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, once posed in his meditations. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. He wasn't talking about wishful thinking. He was pointing to something deeper, the space between you and your thoughts. Carl Jung, the father of analytical psychology, took it further. He said the human psyche isn't just made of what you consciously know. There's a vast unconscious world inside you, filled with forgotten memories, repressed desires, inherited instincts. And your thoughts, they're often just surface ripples, echoes from below. Thoughts are like passing clouds, constantly shifting, endlessly moving. But beneath that mental weather, there's something in you that never changes. Something deeper than any belief, quieter than any emotion, a stillness, a presence, the real you. Most people never notice it. They spend their lives entangled in thought, mistaking the voice in their head for their identity. And that's where the trouble begins, because when you believe every thought, even the cruel ones, they start to shape your reality. One single sentence, "I'm not enough," can hijack your emotions, drain your confidence, and guide your choices. Believe the thought, "I'm going to fail," and you'll begin living like it's already true. Not because it is, but because your mind has convinced you it must be. The question is, are you the thinker or the one observing the thoughts? Once you realize the difference, everything changes. Not every thought you have is true, but your brain doesn't always let you know that. It generates ideas, beliefs, fears, some helpful, some harmful, and presents them with the same authority. And without realizing it, you accept them as fact. Here's a powerful question. Whose voice is that in your head? Have you ever noticed it sounds strangely familiar, like a parent who used to criticize you, a teacher who doubted you, or even a bully from your childhood? Psychologists suggest that our inner voice is often not entirely our own. According to Lev Vygotsky, inner speech begins as external dialogue, things we hear from the outside world and eventually internalize as part of our identity. Over time, those messages become woven into our thoughts, forming a script that runs in the background of our lives. Sometimes this voice becomes overly negative or self-critical. And when it does, it's easy to forget that it's not necessarily accurate, it's just repetitive. This repetition gives it power, not truth. But when those words come from your own mind, you believe them because they feel familiar. The brain works like a machine, constantly producing thoughts, many of which are echoes from the past. And over time, repetition starts to feel like truth. But here's the truth. Just because a thought shows up doesn't mean it's right. Not every thought deserves your trust. There's a voice in your head. You hear it every day. It narrates your choices, judges your actions, replays the past, and predicts the worst. Sometimes it sounds like you. Sometimes it sounds like someone else. But here's the part most people never stop to ask. Who's actually in charge here? Are you controlling that voice, or has it quietly taken control of you? The truth is, most people live on autopilot. They don't question their thoughts. They don't notice the way their inner dialogue shapes their mood, their confidence, their relationships. They assume that because a thought arises, it must be valid. But neuroscience and psychology tell a different story. Thoughts are automatic. Many aren't intentional. Thoughts are like waves. Some are calm and fleeting. Others come crashing in, overwhelming and relentless. But the waves aren't the problem. The real question is, what do you do when they rise? Do you let them pull you under, losing yourself in every fear, doubt, or memory they bring? Or do you learn to ride them balancing, adjusting, observing without being swallowed whole? You don't control when the waves come, but you do control how you meet them. So, Carl Jung believed that the inner voice in your mind doesn't just speak randomly, it often serves a purpose, to protect the persona. The persona is the mask we wear to be accepted by the world. It's the version of ourselves we present to seem likable, smart, strong, or successful. But here's the core stop. To maintain that mask, your mind must suppress anything that doesn't fit. And so it pushes away the parts of you that feel unacceptable: your anger, your insecurities, your vulnerability, your desires. Jung called this the shadow. The inner voice, in this case, becomes a gatekeeper, not of truth, but of performance. And that's where the distortion begins. The voice inside your head may sound wise, logical, even moral. But often, it's just an old operating system, programmed by fear, childhood conditioning, cultural pressure, and shame. It doesn't reflect your true self, it reflects your survival strategy. In modern psychology, this process is called cognitive fusion, when you become so entangled with your thoughts that you can no longer tell the difference between who you are and what your mind says. Dr. Stephen C. Hayes, the founder of acceptance and commitment therapy, describes this as a state where thoughts dominate your emotions, behaviors, and perception of reality. In other words, the voice becomes the driver and you become the passenger. But here's the breakthrough. Just as you fused with those thoughts, you can also diffuse from them. You can learn to hear the voice without obeying it, to observe your thoughts without becoming them, to question rather than blindly accept. The moment you create space between the voice and the observer you, that's when everything begins to shift. That's when healing, freedom, and authenticity can start to take root. In the book Who Am I? And if so, how many? Philosopher Richard David Precht explores a powerful idea backed by neuroscience. Your brain can be retrained. Your thoughts aren't fixed. Your mental habits aren't set in stone. Thanks to the brain's neuroplasticity, you can rewire the connections that shape how you think and feel. Precht explains that repeated thought patterns from neural pathways. The more often you think a certain way, negative or positive, the stronger those pathways become. But the reverse is also true. New patterns of thought can be intentionally formed. You can choose to build circuits of calm instead of chaos, of gratitude instead of fear. For example, Rafael Nadal, one of the greatest tennis players in the world, when asked about the hardest challenge he faces on the court, it wasn't physical, it was managing the voice in his head. To stay mentally stable, Nadal developed a ritual. Between each set, he walks to his bench, takes a sip from one water bottle, then from another, and places them both back in exactly the same spots, angled perfectly toward the court. To outsiders, it might seem obsessive, but for Nadal, it's not about superstition. It's a system for psychological order, a way to ground himself in the present and keep intrusive thoughts from taking over. This Author Eckhart Tolle calls it the awakening of consciousness. It's the moment you realize you are not your thoughts, you are the one observing them. Most people live trapped inside their minds, completely identified with every fear, every judgment, every narrative that arises. The mind becomes like a wild monkey, jumping chaotically from one branch of thought to another, never still, never silent. But here's the shift. You are not the monkey. You are the one watching it. This realization is subtle, but it changes everything. Instead of being swept away by every mental impulse, you begin to create distance. Instead of reacting, you start witnessing. That's where peace begins, not from controlling every thought, but from knowing that you are not those thoughts. You are the stillness behind the noise, the observer behind the storm. If you are not your thoughts, then who are you? This question may sound simple, but it opens the door to something profound. Most of us live as if every thought we have is a fact, a reflection of who we are. But thoughts are just mental events, temporary, fleeting, and often conditioned by fear, memory, or habit. When you stop believing in the thoughts are not enough, it loses its grip. When you stop buying into "I'll never change," something shifts. You realize these are not truths, they're just thoughts. And they only hold power if you give them permission. The moment you recognize this, something remarkable happens. You begin to expand. You stop living in the prison of your beliefs. You stop defining yourself by limitations that were never yours to begin with. When you no longer believe in limits, you become limitless. Not because you suddenly have all the answers, but because you're no longer held back by the illusion that you must believe everything your mind says. Freedom isn't the absence of thought. It's the ability to witness your mind without being ruled by it. Most of us live on autopilot, believing every voice in our head, reacting to every judgment, and confusing our thoughts for our identity. But here's the truth. You are not your inner voice. You are the awareness behind it. That voice in your head, the one that criticizes you, doubts you, replays the past, and fears the future, it isn't always you. In fact, much of it was shaped by other people, your parents, teachers, society. You internalized their words until you thought they were your own. But you can break that cycle the moment you stop automatically believing every thought. The moment you pause and simply observe, you create space. And in that space, you rediscover your power. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are simply waking up. So the next time that voice starts to speak, try asking, is this really me talking? Or is this just a program I've inherited? Because self-awareness begins when you start questioning the voice. And freedom begins when you realize you were never the voice at all. Thanks for looking.